Hello. Stinky is here trying to chew on my laptop, which is not very helpful. Anyway. Alright, so this person, Becky, writes, I have 2 questions I'm hoping you can address in a future video. I'm flirting with the idea of recovery, having suffered from restrictive eating disorder, undiagnosed from the age of 15. I'm now 32. I managed to recover during my pregnancy 3 years ago, so I know it must be possible. However, relapsed horribly immediately after my daughter's birth. My BMI is now, bleep, bleep, bleep. I am mentally exhausted from looking after my child. I thought you can say looking at my child, mentally exhausting. That's why I don't have kids. I would be mentally exhausted just even looking at a child. I'm mentally exhausted even thinking about having a child. Anyway, so I'm mentally exhausted looking after my child, while struggling with all the constant thoughts and numbers of food, and I'm not sure I can take it anymore. My husband had no idea of my eating disorder. I also have Crohn's disease, so I used to cover up my frankly bizarre eating habits. I can't talk today. My first question is, the times that I do eat unrestricted and freely, I am overcome with guilt afterwards, and I end up purging or fasting to make up for the indiscretion. This is obviously not recovery, and I have no idea how to fight the overwhelming guilt. It is consuming it all the time. I have no real life friends. I haven't told my husband, and my family live abroad, so I basically no one to turn to for support. I also don't believe where to tell him that my husband would be as supportive or helpful. Were I to tell him, sorry. He is very suck it up and deal with it sort of person. Do you have any advice for getting through this mental wall alone? My second question is the genetic component to anorexia, as I have a daughter, she is 3, and I'm terrified that if she were to diet in the future, she could well develop a restrictive eating disorder. Is this likely? I would be utterly heartbroken if she were to suffer the way that I do, and it would be my fault as I pass on the genetic predisposition to her. Well, I'm afraid that you can't help passing on anything genetic. You can't exactly control it. Yet, anyway, I mean, in the future, it might happen that you can get pregnant and then you log into a computer and choose which genes you want to pass on and which ones you don't, but we're not there yet. So there's not much point feeling guilty about that because you can't do anything about it. But it is likely that your daughter will have the genetic predisposition for an eating disorder, unfortunately. But many people have the genetic predisposition and don't develop an eating disorder if they don't go into energy deficits. So you can just do your best to demonstrate to your daughter that she doesn't need to go on a diet or anything like that. Of course, people go into energy deficit for reasons other than dieting, but that is one of the most common reasons, one of the most common causes of energy deficit is deciding that you need to go on a diet. So keep the good health of every size and demonstrate that yourself, and hopefully your daughter will be just fine. But there's no feeling guilty about it. It's a big waste of energy. There's not much you can do about that other than focus on your own behaviors and your own self and your own eating disorder and get yourself fully recovered right now. In terms of support, well, you can try explaining the biological aspects to your husband. I think that for some people that's helpful, understanding the biology behind it and the biology behind what happens when you have a genetic predisposition and malnutrition and all of those sorts of things. And with that explained, then he may be able to, actually help a little bit more. But also that suck it up and get on with it attitude can be helpful if you allow it to. Just understanding that, yeah, you've got to get on and you've got to eat more food and you've got to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. And so sometimes that attitude is actually just what you really need to do, because there's not much. Compassion certainly makes you feel understood, and that's important. But ultimately, it is going to come down to you getting on with it, putting the food in your mouth, not allowing yourself to restrict, not allowing yourself to compensate after you think that you've eaten too much, not allowing yourself to purge, because it's always a choice. It is a choice to purge, it is a choice to restrict, and it is a choice that you're making. And so recovery, whichever way you approach it, to fully recover, you're going to have to choose not to do those things when you really, really, really want to. You really will want to purge. There'll be times when you've eaten a load of food and you really, really want to purge. And you can't do that if you consider yourself to be in recovery. If you're in recovery, you can't engage with eating disorder behaviors. You just can't have it both ways. You can't do that. And so sometimes they just suck that up and get on with it is just the sort of thing that you need. It's certainly the sort of thing that I needed. And understanding, you know what, it's going to be difficult. There are going to be times when you really want to restrict because you feel that you ate too much the day before, and that urge feels so strong. And you have to force yourself to eat anyway. And I don't know that anything other than pure determination, and this is the way that it's going to be, necessarily makes that easier. It's just about being, this is the fire that I have to walk through, and I'm going to fucking walk through it. And I'm just going to keep putting one foot after the other, and I'm going to keep going. And understanding that to turn back, which is what happens, any time that you purge via exercise or restriction or whatever it is, that's always stepping back. And as soon as you step back, then you didn't step forward, did you? It is actually quite as simple as in any moment that you're in, you always have a choice. It's, do I do the recovery thing or do I do the eating disorder thing? That's always the choice that's with you, and it always is a choice, even though it doesn't feel like it. And so it's just taking it moment by moment and saying, in this moment right here, I'm not going to purge. I'm not going to think about later. I'm just going to focus on this moment right here. And in this moment right here, I'm not purging. And then all the moments add up. Before you know it, you didn't purge for a week. And then you didn't purge for a month. And that's how it goes. And then the urge to purge really isn't even there anymore. That's how it goes. But it starts right in this moment, making the decision of every action that you do. This is going to be recovery focused. I'm going to rest. I'm going to eat without restriction. And I'm not going to engage in any eating disorder behaviors. And probably, if you can explain that to your husband, hey, look, here's the deal. This is what I have to do. Then that's pretty simple. To help you stick by not purging, eating without restriction. The guilt bit, again, now this, people hate it when I say this, and I know it's really annoying, and I would hate it when someone said this to me as well. But it is always a choice to engage in emotions, and it's a choice to engage in the guilt emotion that comes up after eating. Your brain brings up that guilt emotion because you've taught your brain that guilt is the appropriate response to eating more than you think that you should eat. The way that you taught your brain that is by when your brain suggested that emotion, probably instigated by the genetics of your eating disorder, because if you were migrating, then you can't just sit around eating all day. So your eating disorder genetics are bringing up that thing of like, you should not sit around and eat more than you need. You've got to feel guilty if you do that because we need to motivate you to keep moving. But you still made the choice to engage in that emotion. And I know it doesn't feel like you did, and then what happens is you keep on engaging with the emotion of guilt after eating more than you think that you should. Till your brain gets wired, just like guilt is the appropriate neural pathway after eating more than I think I should. And so that becomes hardwired. And the way that we rewire that is by refusing to engage in that guilt emotion. Understanding that your brain's going to bring that emotion up because it thinks that it's the right thing to do. It thinks that's appropriate. You just have to go, thank you very much, brain. It's not appropriate anymore. I'm not engaging in that emotion. I refuse to feel guilty. Even if you don't believe it, even if deep down you believe that you should feel guilty, refuse to engage in the emotion. And after a while, your brain's going to be like, not engaging in the guilt anymore. Maybe that's not correct anymore. Maybe that's not needed after eating, which is exactly what we want your brain to learn. But you have to train your brain that. Every time you engage in the guilt emotion after eating, you're training your brain that you should feel guilty. So, brains are highly trainable, including yours. The hardest part is understanding that it's absolutely a choice to engage in negative emotions about your body, about eating, about any of those things. It's not your choice that they come up, but it is your choice to engage in them. And so that's where the power lies with you, to not engage. It's fucking difficult, but you can do it. I know you can.